Welcome, everybody. It's that time again. Welcome to another essential conversation at Wellbeings. And today we're going to talk about, sex addiction. Just take a moment to feel into that one. And we're going to talk about many aspects of it. We're going to talk about, what it is, what's the cause and effects of it, how to understand really what it is in essence. But I came across something that was very important, and we're going to, of course, talk today. Is Dr. Alex is going to lead us in on this, and thank you, Doctor, for being with us here today again.
Yeah, of course.
And something I found that was really quite striking to me that I didn't realize, and it's in a UK survey, but I think the survey was done by the American Association run by Carnes, which is 1 in 25 people suffer with sex addiction. I know classifications are not always that solid, but that was really striking to me to kind of hear that. And in this particular survey, which covered like 2,000 or 3,000 people, it was 75 to 80% were men, and then the remainder were women that came into treatment. The men sort of addiction was more objectification, was more voyaging, was more sort of one night stand sort of thing, and then the woman's presented cases in the therapy room were kind of issues around power and being able to, again, a mixture of other things. But I would love for us to start there and start to maybe think about what is this thing that often is not really properly defined or understood.
Sure. Well, it's an incredibly complex question because with alcoholism, for example, it's very easy. You either drink or you don't. But with sex, it's much more amorphous and it shows up very differently in every single human being. So if we start with what you said about men, that for men it's about objectification and anonymous sex. Today, it's often about transactional sex, so paying for sex, whether it's a lap dance or sexual massage or escorts, or even men that are into sugar babies. They're still paying. They're supporting them or buying them, clothes and trips and things of that nature. So money is always about power and control and transacting. And so in that, there's a very impersonal, objectified way of viewing the object of sex. And often it's not about the sex as much as it is about the hunt and the validation. So the hunt is the guy that's out for anonymous sex, in bars and clubs or wherever, picking women up. And often people that hire sex workers or are more into what I would call power and control issues are looking for validation. They want to know that they are wanted, desirable, sexually adequate, things of that nature. So as I'm talking about it, what you can probably hear is that it's not what we would call a two-person system. It's not about you and me and getting to know the other person and experiencing them fully as a human being. It's about usury. It's a one-person system. It's about me. It's about getting off. It's about getting my needs met in a certain way. It's about me acting out my feelings, whether I'm sad or angry or, feeling like life is unfair or lonely, all of those things. So sex is used in place of healthier coping strategies. And, for women, when you talk about power and control, likewise, women will use their sexuality, their bodies as a currency because they don't feel like they deserve anything other than that. And they also know they can get what they want through sex. Many women, though, tend to be more what's called sexually codependent in that they're having sex because they think if they have sex, they'll be loved. So they're looking for someone to love them, and they're willing to have all kinds of sex with all kinds of strangers in order to find one person that will have them. So it really is a deprivation, a place of deprivation.
Wow, and as you were sharing there, I was just trying to feel in my body this place as you were talking about the men, because I happen to be one. And I'm just, as you were going through those sort of descriptions, first thing that stood out was the aloneness, the isolation, the sort of landscape. When you talk, it's like you're by yourself in it. There's no exchange happening. But how, it's just that sort of. So at first, as you were talking, I got to feel the sort of real aloneness that is there underneath all of that, and sort of, and like, speak to that. Do you meet that? Is that a place that's so we got the coping strategies, right? So tell us a little bit more about the complexity of what it might also be hiding or helping the individual avoid.
Well, somebody's been listening to this and saying, that's not me. I don't feel alone when I do this. But the truth is, the other person doesn't really care about you, especially if you're spending money on them. They care about the money and they have their own issues. And so it's a false sense of being known or being wanted or not being lonely. And anybody who's engaging in these behaviors knows that when it's over, there's a profound sense of loneliness and sometimes even feelings of guilt, shame, and remorse, especially if you're in a committed relationship and you're cheating and lying. And sometimes that leads to despair. And in some cases, ideas of suicide or attempting suicide. It can get really, really dark for some people. So one of the things that we know is that people that really struggle with any kind of addiction are isolated. They're lonely. They didn't get their needs met as children. Oftentimes people will come in and they say, oh, I had a fine childhood. And my feeling is, well, if your childhood was fine, you would not be talking to me. If you're on my couch, something is awry. There's a problem. But that's the way denial works and self-deceit works, right? We have to tell ourselves it's okay in order to endure or tolerate, whether it's emotional or abuse or neglect.
We hold on to these fixations that help us manage childhood life, but then really, they need to be slowly unraveled as we become adults to really understand, to take people or parents sometimes off these pedestals or to pull back from the codependency that we still might have with them, all of which is to keep at a distance something haunting that's there
right
in the mix. But I'm curious about, so this is what sex addiction is, and what are you seeing as predominantly something that is maybe fueling the rise in the numbers of which are these ways of relating to each other, which is a distance, defensive, using power, control, sort of submissive, all these particular aspects. What are you seeing arriving again and again at this time in your clinic?
Well, look, that I think speaks to what's happening culturally all over the world. But I want to go back to the word you used, the haunting word, how loneliness haunts us. And then I'll answer that question too. But I wrote a book called Sex Addiction as Affect Dysregulation. And that's looking at the underlying neurobiological, meaning physiological mechanisms that drive all addicts. And this is a general hypothesis, but what we know is when infants don't get their needs met, when infants are not attuned to, they're not seen, attended to, the primary caregiver, typically the mother, is not playing with the child, watching the child, regulating the child, changing the child, being with that baby so that the structures and functions of its brain can come to fruition in what we call a secure way. There are going to be problems. And these are pre-verbal traumas, if you will. And that's what they're called. They're unrepaired assaults on that infant's nervous system. So if you've got a mother who's chronically depressed, who's chronically anxious, who's alcoholic, who's never home, that infant is going to struggle with the development of a mature self. And the self is tied to the autonomic nervous system, to the body. That if this infant is, let's just say, freaked out all the time, scared, in a high arousal state, and nobody's coming to soothe it, that infant will turn into a child, into an adult that's got high anxiety and always looking for something to make it feel better, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, you name it. There's going to be some impulse problems towards something outside of me to make me feel better. And conversely, if you get an infant that is depressed, that's just shut down, can't contact bodily feeling states. Nigel, you're always referencing what you're feeling in your body. Being embodied is what's necessary in order to really be happy and to have any kind of true sexual pleasure. But if you can't feel that, then that same child is also going to start reaching for things like drugs, alcohol, and sex, because that's an activation automatically of the arousal states. For sex addicts, namely the dopamine system that makes us feel good, that's exciting, it's intense. And sex addicts will confuse intensity for intimacy all the time. It's like, oh my God, this person's so hot, or they're the one, or I can't live without them. Like it's in this insane feeling because it is an internal high that fades over time. And then you're constantly churning through people looking for the one, but there's no one because it's an inside problem. So if you've got those setups early on, and then later, 3, 4, 5 years old, you also have a family system that's alcoholic or abusive or neglectful, it just compounds the child's sense of being alone and empty, right? Mm-hmm. And always looking for something outside of itself to make itself feel better. So they're typically good reasons that people are sex addicts. Mm-hmm. And you and I were talking briefly earlier that many of us, when we're in college, let's say, drink too much, have too much sex, have too much fun, but those seem to be normal developmental tasks. Like we're out on our own for the first time and we're going kind of wild, and we can, right? We have the bodies to do it. We've got the resilience to do it. We can party all night and take a test the next day and make an A, and, good on you. And at some point, a whole group of people age out of those behaviors. But that percentage that you were talking about, the 1 in 25 of that cohort don't make it out. They become alcoholics or they're sex addicts. They don't ever stop those behaviors. And then they become monstrous. They become much, much worse and destructive over time.
I had a woman or a man who was talking about his wife and how for 22 years, the wife always would say, well, this is what I used to do when you met me. So you have nothing to really argue about. And she would go out and find escorts. She would masturbate in front of the kids. She would go out clubbing twice a week. She was really the wife was really in that very young state that never matured out of it. Right. And the man came to therapy to kind of ask, and of course he was made to be wrong for having any sort of curiosities around this. And it was very shocking for him, for me to present what you've just said, that no, that's kind of not okay. That I can understand how that would be a lot. And he didn't know. He just thought, well, she didn't whenever, so it's okay for you not to grow up then, and then it's like, like we end up being on a bicycle with little side wheels and eventually we mature to being on a bicycle with 2 wheels.
Right. Yeah, I mean, she was clearly reenacting her childhood trauma and sexually abusing her children. If she was masturbating in front of her children, that's sexual abuse, because she had no boundaries, and she also had no sense of herself at all. She's constantly stimulating herself in ways that are painful and destructive. And, you have to wonder about the husband, like what kind of family did he grow up in, where he didn't have any boundaries either, that he couldn't look at that and say, that's not right, or I can't live with that, or I want you to get help. Instead, he's sort of got his head in the sand. He's a little, spaced out himself, thinking, well, is that okay or isn't it? And, we often need someone to say, actually, hello, that's not okay.
Yeah. And, and the 2 of you, as some of us were really, messaging in about, like, they were confused about what it is and what it isn't, like what it is and what it isn't, because because I do also have other clients who get in touch with the sexuality, and then and they want to explore it, and then they think, oh no, that's maybe, see, there's this, and this is what I think, Doc, when you talk about the complexities about this, because there's so many misconceptions of sex addiction, or what healthy sex is supposed to be, that it confuses us. Sometimes we're in it, we don't know we're in it. Sometimes we're enjoying our healthy sex, but we shame ourselves for that.
Well, one of the easy ways to think about sex addiction is it secretive? You know, would you tell your friend, you meet a friend, you know, for whatever, a drink at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock after work, and they're like, how was your day? And you're like, oh, it was great. I got some work done. I went and paid somebody for sex. Then I had a meeting. Like, are you free to talk about it? Would you tell your wife or your mother about it? So is it secretive? And then is it shaming? Do you feel shameful afterwards? Do you feel bad about yourself after you've had the sexual experience because it leaves you empty, or you feel bad that you used somebody? And is it abusive? Is it abusive to yourself? Is it abusive to the other person? So is it secretive, shaming, or abusive? And if the answer is yes, then you likely have a problem.
I remember a client who would have said no to all of those things and would have been, but was in such a level
Denial.
of denial that it was, and power hungry in a way, to be honest. It was, this is just what we do. This is what we do. And it's like, you know, when I've spent a long time working with clients in Asia, and you have some different like sort of cultural and levels of I suppose wealth in Asia,
sure.
and all that comes into it as well. And it was like so shocking to even start to have the conversation, to have somebody to really explore. Well, that feels like that's, you know, that seems very abusive, was what came out over time, there was a space for him to hear that.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm curious about that. So it's
that goes back to your question about culture. And it's like, well, which culture are we talking about? You know, in Western culture, we have these ideas about monogamy, but all of that is breaking down also. And it's different if it's consensual non-monogamy. If you're in a relationship and your partner's in agreement that you either have a don't ask, don't tell rule, or you actually have contracts about, you know, how many people you can have sex with, how many times a year, protection, like you've had an explicit conversation about it, then that's your life. You get to have the life you want to have. But if you take a vow of monogamy and your partner thinks that that's true, but you're out having sex with lots of different people all the time, that's a problem of integrity. It's not even, you know, I wouldn't even go as far as moral. It's an integrity problem, and it's about breaking your word. And what kind of person do you want to be? You know, because even these men in Asia, presumably men, you know, do they tell their wives that they're hiring sex workers? No. And so why not? Why not just tell her? There's a level of entitlement that comes with the kind of wealth that you're talking about also. Well, I deserve this, or I make all the money. And so these are cultural issues. Some of them, I'm sorry to say, we ascribe to the patriarchy of male entitlement.
Exactly.
So
entitlement is the word right there, and it's, you know, it's so, it's like it takes, the word is, it feels non-shakable. It's like so rigid, and it's like and there's so much protection around it, you know, because it's been handed on, first of all. It's sort of, I would call it contaminants from cultural hand-me-downs. And then it's just been reinforced within the group of friends and within their mind. And then here's some guy or some therapist trying to invite them to be curious about it. You know, it's hard.
So it always comes down for me to, what kind of life do you want to have? Who do you want to be? What kind of man do you want to be? How do you want to show up for your kids, your family? Do you want to walk into a room knowing that you've got this shameful, dirty secret, or that you're spending your family's money without them knowing about it, that your wife has no idea? I mean, I've had clients who have spent, you know, sometimes $1 million on affair partners. But if not that, thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on their acting out. So there's, money that's being stolen from the family, that's being lied about. There's having sex with your partner, unprotected sex with your partner after you've had sex with other people. And that's not consensual, right? Your partner is assuming that you're the only person they're having sex with, but they don't know that they're having sex with all these other people. And sometimes people transmit sexually transmitted infections, which can be horrible to the person on the receiving end of it. And then there are all the lies that ensue that you have to lie about in order to keep all the plates spinning.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. I mean, that's the thing about sex addiction. All the energy is spent getting into the sexual experience, and then all the rest of your energy is spent covering it up on the back end of the sexual experience. So when people make jokes about sex addiction, or they think it's fun and cool, they're probably not really sex addicts. Because sex addicts are demoralized. At some point, it stops working. It's exhausting. It's profoundly shaming. And people don't know how to get out of it. And I've had clients say to me, I knew this was going to be a train wreck. I saw it coming. I knew I was going to get caught, but I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how to stop it. So, if somebody's 27 years old and they're out every weekend with their buddies and they're picking up women and having sex and they're like, I'm a sex addict and it's a badge of honor. It's like, cool. But at some point, it's not cool. It's not fun and it's not funny. And if you're doing that and that's you, you'll know when that time comes because you will be in gut-wrenching pain. Because sex addicts lose everything that has any meaning to them. They lose their jobs, their wives, their girlfriends, their boyfriends, their husbands, family members are angry at them. They lose everything. It's no longer a joke or, fun.
So if anybody's watching, who either has a friend or themselves or a family member where they may be struggling in a way you haven't, definitely please share this. I think it could be immensely helpful for them. But let's imagine you're watching and you some of these things are pointing to a maybe that there is secrets or that there's shame attached to it, or and there's some of these things that kind of join in your mind as you hear us talk. Doc, what would be like the a process that happens if you can walk through the stages? I know everyone has their own unique histories. Mm-hmm. that has this coping strategy in a way, and I don't mean to simplify it, but just call it a coping strategy. But what are the sort of let's look at it from a positive, hopeful stance of a journey when an addict comes in the door and says, I don't know, here I am. What is this all about?
Oh, you're talking about what happens, like how do people get help? How do they get out of the problem?
Yeah, when they come in and they may, as they say in AA, when they realize, they have to put their hands up and say they have this car's out of control here, and for some reason they can get underneath the denial and actually go look for help.
Yeah. Well, there's also that saying, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's exactly. Usually when people say I have a problem. Unfortunately, most people come into treatment after they've been caught, after they've destroyed their relationships. And that's a long, arduous journey back to building trust. Occasionally, single people come in and they say, okay, I can't keep doing this because I can't put a relationship together. And the only common denominator is me. You can blame men for being unavailable or women for not seeing you, but you are the common denominator in the equation. So I think the first thing, as always, as you mentioned, is saying that I have a problem. It's admitting that you have a problem. And that can be so, so difficult because there's so much shame with this problem. And I wish we could be much more public about it and the way we're having this conversation right now, because shame is the cause and the effect of the sex addiction. So I'm going to say that again. It's the cause. If you've got a shame-based sexuality, if you were sexually abused, you're going to feel dirty from the time that abuse happens. And then you're going to seek out furtive, dirty, humiliating kind of sex. And it's one thing if that's intentional, like, you know, that's your jam and it turns you on and you're part of a community that does that. It's another when your sexuality owns you and you don't own your sexuality, when you're just driven by it. So that's the engine that drives it. And then the sex addiction itself becomes abusive, traumatic, shaming, because people report having sex even though they don't want to. It's like, yeah, I would spend hours on the internet looking for the perfect person. And then I went and hooked up with them and they didn't look anything like their picture. And it was kind of gross. And I felt gross afterwards, but I did it anyway. So you can see that that just keeps perpetuating shame and self-loathing. So that first call to a therapist, you know, the first meeting with somebody is a huge victory and huge celebration and worth celebrating. Or the first time you walk into a 12-step meeting, just to go and listen. You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to speak. Just go listen for the similarities, not the differences. So that is really the first step, is waving the white flag and surrendering and saying, I have a problem here. I need help.
And, you know, so the journey from that step and over the years of working with people, what does that journey entail after you step in the door? And you know, it's like, I know it could be from 6 months or it could be 6 years of, you know, or less or more. I imagine more in some cases.
Well, it depends on the person also and how badly traumatized they were as children. So for some people, they can get sexually sober in as little as, you know, 6 to 12 weeks. They come in, we talk about all their secrets, lies, and excuses. We give them task work. We help them look at their cycle of addiction and all the types, the ways that they act out and the kind of sex addict they are, because in the sex addiction treatment world, we've delineated 12 types. And so that helps us also focus on how to help you stop doing what you were doing, and create a sobriety plan based on your unique way of doing it, because everybody does it a little bit differently. And so it's about going through your family of origin with a fine-tooth comb and your sexual timeline history, and looking at the ways that you don't express your feelings directly. You know, sex addiction can be a lack of assertion, a problem of assertion, which, you know, if you and I are in a relationship and I get angry at you or you get angry at me and we don't work it out and I feel entitled now to go have sex with my coworker, that's a way of eroticizing my rage or sexualizing my rage. I'm angry at you, so I'm going to go have sex with someone else. It's like the alcoholic that drinks at someone. And so to be able to start to speak up for myself can be really difficult if I grew up in a family where that wasn't allowed, where we didn't talk about feelings, or as a female, you had to just shut up. That's where the codependent component comes into play. So, yeah.
It feels such an important thing, Doc, to have someone sitting in the couch being able to practice doing that with you, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
start to allow this sort of journey of doing what their mother just says, you know, that what they were, there was a suppression, avoided withdrawal sort of template or conformity and survival and you know, sort of like, you know, changing, like whether it's you know, displaying a certain way to offset, and they can come into you and to start to just practice opening that door or opening that chest that's been put away in that dusty garage that's been out of sight and out of mind, and slowly be able to start to share and to talk. And I can imagine they can start to bridge that back into their relationships again.
Yes. And the first, you know, part of this whole thing, though, is unpacking the sex addiction with a fine-tooth comb and telling everything that you've been up to, what you've been doing. And that is just a huge relief for people. And it also starts to deconstruct shame, because I'm rarely interested in the sexual act. It's about the meaning the act has that's more interesting. You know, we don't really talk about sex that much in early sobriety. It's all about what did those behaviors, where'd they come from, where'd they start, what meaning did they have, why are you doing them? And oftentimes people are doing it because they're just repeating the abuse that was done to them. You know, if you've got a father, if you're male, you've got a father who's shaming and critical and humiliating, and you hate yourself, then you're going to go do things that make you hate yourself. And then you're going to beat yourself up for it afterwards. And you might live across the world from your father, but you're still carrying out his orders. And so it's really about saying, enough, I'm going to stop abusing myself the way he abused me and start to find out who I am. And here's the thing, you know, people are so terrified to stop their sexual behaviors, but it's like, it's not a life sentence.
Mhm.
You know, if you stop for 6 months and just make the experiment to see, can I actually do this? And who am I without this? Then it'll either work or it won't. And if it doesn't, you can always go back to doing it. I mean, anybody can have sex any minute of any day. Somebody's having sex right now, right?
Mhm.
So it's not going anywhere. It's just about the willingness to say, I'm going to find out and see if I can get to the bottom of this, of why I do what I do. And that's a question that almost everyone asks. Why
What I
do I
love,
do what I do?
what I love is how you're approaching it in regards to sort of like not fueling any sort of course, shame or guilt, or making it bigger than it is or
Right.
smaller than it is. You kind of, it's kind of like, it's like, yeah, hey, you know, objective reality here. Like this is doable. This is what's required. I'm
Right.
here with you. I'm here to hear all of it. It's all welcome. All of you is welcome. And you know
Yeah.
what? This is, you can get through this. You know, it's just like how you were sharing that. I felt the power, and as
Hmm.
you were speaking, there was like a conviction, and at the same time, there was this sort of welcoming energy that's saying, "Hey, this is all like this there's a specificness to what you're bringing to me that we're going to uncover, but there's an ordinariness to the struggle,
Right.
and all, you know, and there's something about that you don't dramatize it or you don't add to that." And it was just wonderful how I got so struck by those two things: the power
Hmm.
of your knowing from journeying in this world for the length of time that you have and your own personal journey, and the sort of grounded sort of, yeah, we can do this sort of energy.
Yeah, I mean, I know in my bones that I can get people out of this problem. I've been doing it for almost 25 years now. I know there's a way in and a way out. And for some people, they can, you know, they can stop faster than others for a variety of reasons. And some people need long-term depth psychotherapy because of the depth of their trauma. And other people, you know, can do it by way of, you know, therapy or a coaching program or 12-step, and start to change their life pretty quickly. And when I say quickly, I'm talking about a year. You're going to be a year older anyway. It took you a lot longer than a year to get into this hole. So it's not a long time to dig out of it. But people have to really be committed to doing it. They have to be willing, they have to be committed. Those are the people I love working with. Because I can show you the way, just like you can show someone the way, but we can't do the work for you. You have to be willing to put all that time and energy you're putting into acting out. Like, how many hours a week do you spend, you know, looking at porn, cruising for, you know, escorts, meeting somebody, covering it up? I mean, it's like a part-time job.
Mhm.
So if you take those same 10, 15, 20 hours a week and put it into your sobriety, to your recovery process, you won't lose. But you have to be motivated and willing.
Yeah, this word that came out strong again there was like commitment. Yeah,
Yeah.
like what it takes to be committed. You know, like
Mhm.
what it really takes to be committed and to be all in instead of having that one foot out the door. And I'm enjoying it. You say you enjoy to work with people who are committed, because it's a painful journey for someone who's just fascinated with the idea of sobriety,
Right.
and then you know, like, what for those people who maybe have had it, who are listening, who have addictive tendencies, and have maybe toiled with the idea, whether it's with alcohol or sex. What is it? How this is not an easy question here. How does one start to cultivate the possibility of being committed when there's a history of um, duking out the door? You know, I have my own ideas about it, but I'm
Mhm.
curious how to cultivate commitment.
Well, sometimes people aren't in enough pain, unfortunately. They haven't really hit a bottom. They haven't lost enough. There aren't enough consequences. And so I don't know, you know, how you build that into somebody. I can only point the way and say, what's your life going to look like 2, 3, 5 years from now if you keep doing what you're doing? Where do you want to be in your life? What kind of person, again, do you want to be? And if that doesn't have any meaning to anybody, then there's only so much that we can do. I'm always willing to have a conversation with somebody, but I know that, and you see this in groups and in 12-step meetings, that when people are committed, the whole group rises together. I've seen this for years in the group therapies that I lead. When one person gets sober, everybody starts to hold each other accountable, and everybody's rooting for everybody. Everyone's functioning starts to come up, and it's just a beautiful thing to watch because it's happening in community. It's not isolated or alone.
I think you just named the answer there. It's like, it's going to be easy to commit. And this is to anybody out there who struggles with commitment. Well, I would ask the question, do you have a sense of belonging in your life? Mm-hmm. Where is there an absence, an absence of belonging, or so if our community is mildly or moderately responsive, Doc, or we have a group to attend, or we have friends where we can attune to, I can imagine there would be a sort of a domino effect of being able to listen to yourself, to be a little bit more discerning, to have other people sharing their impact of how they see you, feel you, and that help could cultivate a sort of commitment, because you're getting support and connection and growing a sense of where I'm not alone with my mind,
right?
And I can grow it with other minds. I can allow other minds in there to help me through the process.
Yeah, and you also start to experience love. People care about you. They wonder where you are. If you don't show up, they're worried about you. They call you. And a lot of times people that are addicts didn't get that growing up either. It was somebody that actually really cared and really saw them. And it's to me, it's just incredibly moving when I see groups of men or groups of women coming together and fighting for each other and themselves. And there are studies that show that addicts get better in 12-step groups. They get better in groups because they start to form secure attachments with people. And if you can start to show up in the way that you're talking about by making commitments, by being accountable, you're starting to model what it means to be in an intimate love relationship. Right?
Wow.
So,
yeah. That's so powerful. I like about 3 weeks ago, we had a young man who had come from a broken family, who had he just started the group. It was the third week, and he turned around at the end of the group. He started to grieve pretty heavily, and then after that he laughed a lot, and then he grieved again, and then he turned around to the group and he said, the feelings that I'm feeling now is what I used to chase with my drugs.
Beautiful. Yeah.
He says, and I didn't know that we could feel this way with people, because as a child, and he was grieving the realities of the loss of back to environment, a non-responsive, not safe, sort of, unreliable environments where closeness and togetherness was a distant, it was out of sight.
And even dangerous sometimes for some, because you get shamed or made fun of, and
there was no safety for that.
Yes, and I think, I've said this before, that sex addicts are looking for love in all the wrong places, right? They're going to the left when really they want to be going to the right, but to the right is too scary and unknown. How do you trust somebody that's going to, when all you have the experience of is rejection or abandonment or shame and humiliation? Why would you trust another human being, right? They're untrustworthy. So finding a tribe of people that get you, that know what it's like, where you can start to trust, where you can show up as yourself with no judgment about what you've done, that is an emotionally corrective experience. And that's what starts to happen in these group processes.
Yeah. So and it's no reason, no matter what we have to say about rehabs over the world, although we can't question the type of groups, but that group therapies are always generally a part of it in some, whether it's government run, private, luxury, or bespoke in some way. Group is generally always there, and it's there for a reason,
Yeah, because it's shame reducing. If I come in and I say, "Oh my God, I can never get a date, and men treat me this way, and I do this and that," and then another woman says, "Oh, me too. I have that experience." It's like, what? I thought I was the only one having this experience. You have that experience too? In a second, I don't feel so weird or alone or unusual, or I thought it was just me, or shameful. Like I thought there was something wrong with me. It's like, no, we all have this experience.
I came from a group woman. She was a poet, but I'm not sure if it was her poem or someone else's. But she talked about, before she went into group therapy, she was like this boat out in the ocean, and there was and all she could see was darkness.
Mm.
And then whenever she did a 3-month cycle of being in group, and she was in for a long-term group, she turned around and she says, "Well, what's different now is I'm still in that boat. I'm still not at shore yet, but I see the lights of other boats nearby that help me feel not alone, and that helps
Beautiful.
birth the idea that we can get to the shore together."
Oh, that's so lovely. Yeah.
And it's like I still get moved by it, because
Mm.
she was, in her way of creating
A
this
metaphor. Yeah.
that was her internal state that she was living, that was so new to her.
Right.
And again, for anybody watching, or feeling into what we're saying here, like there's a way that you can move from being alone and needing to medicate or needing to distract yourself, or there's a way where you can slow down and move towards others. And I think in every podcast, I'm always saying this thing, but it's something that I needed to hear so much as a young man, as I matured through my healing journey, of which I'm still on, by the way, is that we can't do this. We can't do this thing called life by ourselves. And
No.
especially if we're troubled, we need to move towards safer groups and spaces where we can get support to understand the trouble.
Yeah, I was thinking, her story down the road would be that there were people in the boat with her eventually.
Yeah.
And, you asked that question a while ago about culture, and I think we just are becoming more and more disenfranchised, more disconnected. Everybody's in their phones, chatting, sexting, afraid to actually make contact with other people. And I don't know, I mean, it's a complex web. I mean, in the United States, we have this kind of hardcore ideal of rugged individualism, which is actually killing us. There's a lack of communal aspect to going to your neighbors for advice or help, or just taking care of each other, relying upon each other the way people do, probably more in rural areas now than certainly urban areas. But we're more and more isolated in a weird way. You know how when you live in a small town or a village, like everybody knows your business? Everyone knows who's having sex, who's not, because you can hear, right, what's going on, or people are gossiping about it. So if a marriage breaks up, you kind of know it's coming down the pike. But in the cities, in the ways that we live in these silos, everybody looks like a great couple. And then the next thing you know, boom, you find out somebody's breaking up and you're like, what? How did that happen? We didn't see it coming. We aren't involved with each other's well-being in that way unless we go out of our way to make friends and have community and have family. And a lot of people get left behind.
So I'm imagining through the work of helping a sex addict, journey with you. These would be invitations to coexist with your therapy. The environment that they start to look at and start to move towards, or start to create, or start to deepen, will be part of the work.
Yeah, and I think that's why it doesn't work for a lot of people, because they think they can do one thing. And it's not one thing. I mean, I've asked my clients over the years, what makes this work for you? And they've told me things like, I build a fortress around myself. I'm never off the grid. I make 4 or 5 phone calls a day when I'm in my car. Of course, in LA, we have traffic notoriously. So you get in your car and you start making phone calls and talking to people. It really is like a part-time job. But the promises that come true, and you can Google the promises, are for real. People really, really fundamentally change their lives. So that's one of the secrets about recovery, is that it's not just about getting abstinence at all. It really is a spiritual path. And whether you believe in a Judeo-Christian God or not, it's irrelevant. You can bring your own brand of spirituality to it. It's spiritual because you are fundamentally becoming more integrated. Neural integration, less dissociation, less self-consciousness and fear. You feel more like the person that you know you're meant to be internally. You just can't get there because you've got, dark sunglasses on in a dark room. And so you start to see and evolve, and it becomes really interesting and beautiful in those instances. But community is a big part of the recipe.
And just as we zoom out a little bit, and in America, for example, other than 12-step or SLA, for example, is a very well-known group that's been going on for such a long time. The groups that you run, is there any sort of community developing possibilities for support for people struggling with sex addiction? Is there a sort of any move towards that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I am doing a coaching program online now for 10 weeks for men specifically, and I have a Facebook group that I just started, so that I'm endeavoring to create that kind of community also, where people can bring their experience, strength, and hope, their wins, their struggles, and that makes it more public. I mean, it's a private Facebook group. You have to be invited to it, but it's still public, saying, hey, we all have this problem and we're going to stop being ashamed of it and hiding. We're just going to talk about it here. So I think there are probably, things like that cropping up that you'd have to look for. I know on Reddit, the platform Reddit, there is a group that Alexandra Rhodes started a long time ago, strictly for porn addicts. And so I think it's called the NoFap group, FAP. And that's got like 4,000 guys on that group, that platform alone. Wow. And again, those people, they don't necessarily identify as sex addicts, because porn addicts are different. And they're just looking at pornography. And, he and a bunch of young men figured out in their 20s that they had a real problem with this and they wanted to stop. So they formulated this platform to help each other, commit to stopping, and they celebrate their wins and they talk about it.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Again, that's one of the things is, if we can allow the shame not to multiply in the darkness and allow it to be brought out where we're on, right. There's movement where there wouldn't have been movement before. That's fantastic to hear that. And is it okay, Doc, to name your private group so they can?
Well, if people want to chat with me and talk about the coaching program, it's info@sexualsobrietysolution.com. And so you can get on my calendar there and we can have a call for like an hour just to talk about what's up with you and, what I have to offer. So that's one way. And yeah, that's probably the best way. So I don't know if there's a chat box here, or do we have a chat box?
Yeah, there's well, what you can do after we're finished, you can send that to me and I can put it in the feed below. We do have can you post a comment there on the little box?
Yeah.
Okay. But that's fantastic. And so just, there's a few things that stood out from today as we just wind it down. And, this thing is that came in is to know that we can't work it out by ourselves. If some of the signs are showing up, move towards a professional to get some help, or move towards a group or a coach who specializes in the field of understanding sex addiction. So you really get proper care. Of course, you can talk to Johnny down the street, your friend, about it, and that's going to be a real help. But then just go for professional help as well, because, and then from that, you'll start a journey of really sharing things you haven't shared before. And the safety and the sort of holding environment of a professional, where you can maybe learn to understand why this is happening, understand and maybe grieve parts of it, and then slowly over time, and that's that can be a short or a long time depending on what else is in the mix, then you slowly could bridge what is happening between you and this professional, this closeness, maybe this even intimacy, into your everyday life, and start changing your world. But the main thing that I have to say that strikes me from all of this is that the fact that if you give it a go, you're moving towards life regardless. You're giving it a go, and you've got nothing to lose to be able to move towards a new way of living and to try something new, because it hasn't been working so far, for sure, if you can be honest, to look at that.
There's a saying in the 12-step programs of tell the truth and tell it faster. And so you want to tell the truth to a fair witness, whether that's a counselor, a close friend that has sobriety, even if they have sobriety in another 12-step program, a therapist, just anyone. The first time you tell the truth and you tell the whole story, that's the beginning of the rest of your life, really. And all of us have issues. Everybody has something. No one escapes this thing alive. No one gets out alive. And so none of us are perfect. Pia Mellody has written the books on codependency, is famous for saying we're all perfectly imperfect.
Exactly.
So, right.
And sex addicts.
What's that?
I love that book with Pia Mellody. I have it in the in the bookshelf. Wow.
But often sex addicts are heavily invested in looking good, and you can't look good and get better. It's like that saying, you can't save your face and your ass at the same time. You've got to pick one. So,
wow, that's so true what you've just said.
Have you heard that saying before, Nigel?
No, I've never heard it. It's wonderful.
It's probably very American.
It's a tad American, yeah.
Yeah.
We like that. We like that here. But yeah, so lots to be said. Some more on this as we'll have some future sort of podcasts on with the doc, I'm hoping. But let's end with this, if this feels okay, is to say that we all have suffering, but it's how we learn to be with our suffering that makes life worth living. If we can understand it and be with it and grieve it, and in a way the grief, in a way, it's a difficult thing to understand, that sometimes we have to grieve something to gain something, or we have to by going into this possible dark parts of trauma, that there's a light that comes with that. It seems almost paradoxical, but yeah, so without me kind of going into a story around this, but yeah, that's been my journey, is to know that, to slowly keep trusting that sometimes to move towards people, and that the darkness can be the light in a way, and by meeting those parts of yourself that you don't love and learning to love them is a sort of, without sounding biblical, a salvation that can help you change your life around. And with sex addiction being such a demoralizing, breaking, and destructive sort of addiction, that there is help, and there is professionals like Dr. Alex here, who's her details are here for you to reach out. All her books are listed. If you don't want to reach out to a professional, get one of her books, because it might be the difference for you, to help you realize some things and join some dots to be able to move towards somebody. So my prayer for all of you is, if this impacts, reach out, reach a professional, or go to a 12-step meeting. But the main thing is to remember that you don't have to be alone with it. Right. Doctor, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. And everybody will be back same time next week. Be well and stay connected.